I am Melanie, 34 years old, an interior designer from Boston, with what I thought was the perfect life. Until yesterday, when I saw a woman who looked exactly like me walking out of my husband's office. Same hairstyle, same clothes, even the same smile I practice in the mirror. After 8 years of marriage to Andrew, I never imagined I would discover something that would shatter everything I believed about us. If you are watching this from somewhere in your life where things seem uncertain, hit that like button and subscribe because my story might just help you see what I couldn't. Andrew and I met at an art gallery opening in downtown Boston. I was showcasing some of my interior design concepts, and he was there representing a client who was interested in purchasing artwork. Our eyes met across the room, and it was like something from a movie. He approached me with confidence wine glass in hand and struck up a conversation about my design philosophy. "I love how you blend modern elements with traditional comfort," he said, studying my concept board. "It feels both sophisticated and livable." His observation surprised me. Most people just commented on colours or patterns, but Andrew saw the intention behind my work. We talked for hours that night, long after the gallery had emptied. He was intelligent, ambitious, and seemed genuinely interested in my passion for design. Our courtship was whirlwind, but perfect. Within 6 months, Andrew proposed during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. The wedding was everything I had dreamed of. Intimate, yet elegant, with only our closest friends and family at a beautiful waterfront venue. Life together felt charmed. Andrew was quickly climbing the ranks at Morgan, Bailey and Peterson, one of the most prestigious law firms in Boston. His specialty in corporate law meant long hours, but the financial rewards allowed us to purchase a beautiful brownstone in Beacon Hill that I lovingly renovated and designed. Meanwhile, I built my own interior design studio, Melanie James Designs. It started small, just me and an assistant working with residential clients. But my reputation grew, and soon I was taking on commercial projects and hiring more designers. The first 5 years of our marriage were blissful. We travelled to Europe twice a year, built our dream home, and were the couple our friends envied. Andrew surprised me with thoughtful gifts, and we spent weekends exploring new restaurants or hosting dinner parties. We discussed having children someday, but agreed to focus on our careers first. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things began to change. It was subtle at first. Andrew staying later at the office, checking his phone more frequently during dinner, taking calls in another room. I brushed it off as work stress. His firm was handling a major corporate merger, and I knew how demanding his partners could be. Another late night, I asked one evening as he packed his briefcase after dinner. "Big case. The Johnson merger is getting complicated," he replied without making eye contact. "Don't wait up." The distance between us grew gradually. Our conversations became superficial, discussing schedules or household matters rather than sharing thoughts and dreams as we once had. When I tried to talk about it, Andrew would assure me everything was fine, that he was just busy with work. I began to doubt myself. Was I being too needy, too sensitive? I tried harder to be the perfect wife. When Andrew mentioned liking a colleague's wife's new bob haircut, I scheduled an appointment the next day to cut my long brown hair into a similar style. He seemed pleased, running his fingers through my new hair. "You look beautiful," he said. "That style really suits you." Encouraged by his reaction, I began paying more attention to the clothes he complimented, the restaurants he enjoyed, the little things that made him smile. I wanted to rebuild the connection that seemed to be fading. I planned special date nights, cooking his favourite meals, and wearing outfits I knew he liked. I redecorated our bedroom in the blue and grey palette he had once mentioned preferring. But no matter what I did, Andrew always seemed distracted, checking his watch or his phone, his mind elsewhere. "Is everything okay with us?" I finally asked one night over the special anniversary dinner I had prepared. "Of course," he replied quickly. "Why wouldn't it be? I'm just swamped with work. This new partnership track is demanding." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I pushed my concerns aside and focused on being supportive. If he needed to work late, I would understand. If he was too tired for conversation, I would give him space. I was determined to be patient to weather this rough patch in our marriage, but the more accommodating I became, the more Andrew pulled away. He began missing dinners without calling. Weekend plans were cancelled last minute due to emergency work situations. Our intimate life became nearly non-existent, with Andrew claiming exhaustion or stress. I was losing myself in the effort to save my marriage, becoming someone I barely recognised in the mirror. Anxious, insecure, constantly seeking approval. But I still had no idea just how deep Andrew's betrayal went, or how much more I would lose before finding myself again. I remember that day with perfect clarity. It was our 8th anniversary, and despite Andrew's increasing distance, I was determined to make it special. He had forgotten our last 2 anniversaries, but I refused to believe he would forget again. I decided to surprise him at his office and take him to lunch at Sorellina, the Italian restaurant, where we had our first date. I spent extra time getting ready that morning wearing a forest green dress Andrew had once complimented, styling my hair the way he liked, and even wearing the perfume he had given me for Christmas, but had barely noticed when I wore it. The offices of Morgan, Bailey and Peterson occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming tower in the financial district. I had only been there a handful of times over the years, usually for holiday parties or special events. The reception area was all marble and glass, designed to intimidate clients and impress partners. As I approached the reception desk, I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. Would Andrew be pleased to see me? Would this gesture help bridge the growing gap between us? "Good morning," I smiled at the receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognise. "I'm here to see Andrew James. I'm his wife, Melanie." The receptionist looked startled, her eyes widening slightly as she glanced down at her computer screen and then back at me. "Oh, Mrs. James, Mr. James is in a meeting right now. Would you like me to let him know you're here?" "No, don't tell him," I said quickly. "It's our anniversary. I'd like to surprise him." The woman looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. "His meeting might run long. Perhaps you could come back later." Her reaction seemed odd, but I brushed it off. "I'll just wait," I insisted, moving toward the seating area. I had been sitting for only about 10 minutes, flipping through a legal magazine without really reading it, when I heard the click of heels on marble. I glanced up and felt my entire world tilt on its axis. Walking toward the elevator was a woman who looked exactly like me, not similar, identical. She had my newly cut bob, styled the same way I had done mine that morning. She wore a dress in almost the same shade of green as mine, though hers was a designer version that probably cost 3 times as much. Her makeup, her jewellery, even the way she carried her bag on her left shoulder, it was like looking into a mirror. I froze, magazine clutched in my suddenly trembling hands, and slid down in my seat, irrationally afraid she would see me and recognise herself. But she never glanced my way, too focused on whatever was on her phone screen as she stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed behind her, I felt physically ill. Who was this woman? Why did she look so much like me? A terrible suspicion began forming in my mind, but it seemed too bizarre, too calculated to be real. I sat there for several minutes trying to calm my racing heart when the elevator doors opened again and a familiar face emerged. Thomas Peterson, one of the founding partners, and Andrew's mentor. "Melanie, what a lovely surprise," he said, spotting me immediately. "Are you here to see Andrew?" "Yes," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "But I just realised I double-booked myself. I have a client meeting I can't miss. Could you not mention to him that I stopped by? I don't want him to think I forgot our lunch date." Thomas looked puzzled but nodded. "Of course. Should I tell him to call you to reschedule?" "No need," I said, already heading for the exit. "I'll text him. Thanks, Thomas." Once in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. My mind was spinning with questions and terrible possibilities. I drove aimlessly around the city for hours trying to make sense of what I had seen. When I finally returned home, I forced myself to act normal. I changed clothes, started dinner, and waited for Andrew to return. When he walked through the door at 7:30, later than usual, but earlier than he had been coming home lately, I studied his face carefully. "Happy anniversary," he said, kissing my cheek and handing me a small gift box. "Sorry I'm late. The Johnson merger is killing me." I opened the box with shaking hands to find a silver necklace with a small diamond pendant. It was beautiful, but all I could think about was whether the woman at his office was wearing its twin. "Do you like it?" Andrew asked, watching my face. "It's beautiful," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you." As I turned to let him fasten it around my neck, I caught a whiff of perfume on his suit jacket. My perfume, but I hadn't been close enough to him for it to transfer. I closed my eyes, feeling sick again. "I made reservations at Sorrelina," Andrew said, checking his watch. "We should leave in about 30 minutes if that's okay." Sorrelina, the restaurant I had planned to surprise him with earlier that day. Was it a coincidence, or had he been planning to take her there too? "Sounds perfect," I replied, wondering if my voice sounded as hollow as I felt. "It'll just freshen up." In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection at the new haircut I had gotten, because Andrew had suggested it at the makeup I wore, the way he preferred at the necklace that now felt like a collar around my neck. For the first time, I wondered if I was looking at myself at all, or at the image of what Andrew wanted me to be, an image he was now recreating with someone else. That night at Sorrelina, I barely tasted the food as my mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? How long had it been going on? I watched Andrew carefully looking for clues for any slip that might confirm my suspicions. He seemed relaxed, more attentive than he had been in months, asking about my newest clients and actually listening to my responses. Was it guilt, or was I imagining things? The next morning after Andrew left for work, I began my investigation. I had never been the type to snoop through my husband's things, but desperation pushed aside my principles. I started with his phone, which he had surprisingly left charging on his nightstand. It was locked, but after 3 attempts, I guessed the correct passcode. The day we closed on our house a date, I was surprised he remembered, given how forgetful he had become about other significant moments in our relationship. What I found made my stomach churn. Hundreds of text messages with someone saved simply as J. The exchanges were intimate, filled with inside jokes and plans for meetings. Many messages referenced our place and special times. There were no explicit photos, but the tone was unmistakably romantic. One message from the previous week caught my eye. "Loved seeing you in that green dress yesterday. You take my breath away. Meeting at 2 tomorrow, the usual place." Green dress. Like the one the woman at his office had been wearing. Like the one I had worn to surprise him. I moved on to his email, but found nothing suspicious in his inbox. Either he was being careful or using another account I didn't know about. Next, I checked our credit card statements online. Andrew's corporate card showed regular charges at restaurants I had never been to, with him jewelry stores and, most disturbingly, a series of payments to a plastic surgery centre in Brookline. I wrote down the name, Boston Aesthetic Medicine, and continued my search. I found receipts for women's clothing in sizes that matched mine for a salon I had never visited for weekend trips to New York and Maine during times Andrew had told me he was at conferences. My hands were shaking as I pulled up his calendar on our shared family account. There were blocks of time marked only with J meeting, or sometimes just a star symbol. These appointments occurred 2 or 3 times a week, often during lunch or early evening hours. I needed to know who Jay was. I turned to social media, searching through Andrew's professional connections. It took me hours of scrolling through LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, but I finally found her, Jessica Winters, a junior associate who had joined his firm about 2 years ago. What I discovered next sent a chill down my spine. Her earliest photos showed a woman who looked nothing like me. She had been a curvy blonde with a completely different style, different makeup, different everything. But as I scrolled through her timeline, I watched her transformation. First, her hair darkened to my shade of brown. Then came the bob haircut, identical to the one I had recently gotten at Andrew's suggestion. Her wardrobe shifted from bright, bold colours to the neutral palette I favoured. Even her makeup changed to match my subtle style. She was becoming me piece by piece, or rather becoming the version of me that Andrew had carefully crafted over our years together. I dug deeper, finding charges for cosmetic procedures that aligned with the changes in her appearance, hair treatments, Botox, even a rhinoplasty that had subtly reshaped her nose to one more similar to mine, all charged to Andrew's corporate card or paid through company bonuses that never appeared on our joint tax returns. The next day, I followed Andrew from a distance when he left for lunch. He drove to a small French bistro in Back Bay, one of our favourite date spots from early in our relationship. I watched from my car as he met Jessica, kissing her in a way he hadn't kissed me in years. They looked happy, comfortable, like a real couple. He tucked her hair behind her ear, a gesture he used to do with me. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued my surveillance, documenting their patterns, their meeting places. I discovered they frequented all of our special restaurants, visited our favourite weekend getaways, even shopped at our preferred stores. It was as if Andrew was recreating our relationship with this new version of me. The final blow came when I followed them to Tiffany's on the Newbury Street. Through the window, I watched as Andrew slipped an engagement ring on Jessica's finger, a 3-carat emerald-cut diamond that looked remarkably similar to my own engagement ring, but larger, more expensive. That evening, I overheard a phone conversation that confirmed my worst fears. Andrew was in his home office door, slightly ajar, speaking in hushed tones. "Everything is proceeding as planned," he said. "The transfer of assets is nearly complete. She doesn't suspect anything. No, I have documentation of her instability. Yes, that's why it's important to establish this pattern now. The prenup has loopholes I can exploit. She won't get the house or access to my partnership equity. Jessica understands the situation completely. By summer, this will all be behind us, and we can start fresh." My blood ran cold. Andrew wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically preparing to leave me with nothing, possibly trying to paint me as mentally unstable to strengthen his position. And Jessica was a willing participant in this scheme. I retreated to our bedroom, mind racing. That night, lying beside the man I now realized was a stranger, I made a decision. I would not be erased. Not by Andrew, not by Jessica, not by anyone. The weeks that followed my discovery were the darkest of my life. I moved through each day in a fog, going through the motions of normalcy, while feeling completely hollow inside. Sleep became elusive, replaced by endless hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage, looking for signs I had missed. Had Andrew ever truly loved me, or had I simply been convenient? Was I always just a placeholder until someone better came along? Or worse, was I just a blueprint for him to design his perfect partner? My appetite vanished. Clothes hung loosely on my frame as I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks. Friends commented on my appearance with concern, but I brushed them off with excuses about a demanding work project. How could I explain that my husband had created a doppelganger of me to replace me? When Andrew was home, I watched him with new eyes. Every gesture, every casual touch now seemed calculated. Was he studying me, gathering data for Jessica to mimic? The thought made my skin crawl. "You look tired," Andrew said one morning over breakfast, studying my face with what once might have passed for concern. "Maybe you should see someone, a therapist perhaps." "Why would you suggest that?" I asked, careful to keep my voice neutral. "You've seemed off lately, distracted. Not yourself," he said, returning to his newspaper. "Just looking out for you. Not myself." The irony was almost too much to bear. I was losing myself while someone else was becoming the me that Andrew wanted. One particularly bad day, I confronted him directly. "Do you know someone named Jessica Winters?" I asked as he packed his briefcase. His reaction was immediate, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, a pause in his movements. "She's a junior associate at the firm. Why do you ask?" "I saw her name on some paperwork you brought home." I lied, watching his face carefully. "I was just curious." "She's working on the Johnson merger with me," he said smoothly, too smoothly. "You're not usually interested in my colleagues." "I thought it might be nice to know more about your work life," I replied. "Maybe we could have her over for dinner sometime." The flash of panic in his eyes was brief but unmistakable. "She's very busy. We all are. It's not a good time for socializing." After that conversation, Andrew became more careful, but also more manipulative. He began leaving articles about stress and anxiety where I would find them. He suggested to my assistant that I might need to reduce my client load. He called my mother to express concerns about my mental health. "Your mother called," I told him one evening. "She seemed worried about me. Any idea why? I may have mentioned you haven't been sleeping well," he admitted with feigned innocence. "She loves you. She's concerned, as am I." He was laying groundwork, I realized, creating a narrative of my instability that would serve him in divorce proceedings. My business partner, Marina, confirmed my suspicions when she pulled me aside after a client meeting. "Andrew called me," she said, her face troubled. "He suggested you might need to take a leave of absence. Said you've been emotionally fragile." "What's going on, Mel?" I brushed it off, claimed Andrew was overreacting to work stress, but inside I was seething. He was systematically undermining me, isolating me from my support network. The worst moment came when I accidentally encountered Jessica at my hair salon. I had arrived early for an appointment and was waiting in the reception area when she walked in. Seeing her up close was surreal, like looking at a version of myself that was both familiar and foreign. She had my hairstyle, my color palette, even similar jewelry, but there was something artificial about the overall effect. I pretended to be absorbed in a magazine as she checked in, but I listened carefully to her interaction with the receptionist. "I'm here for my appointment with Devin," she said, and I froze. Devin had been my stylist for years. "Of course, Ms. Winters. He mentioned you'd want the same treatment as last time. The Melanie Special, he calls it." Jessica laughed, a practiced sound that made my skin crawl. "That's right. Andrew loves the results." I slipped out before she could notice me cancelling my appointment via text once I was safely in my car. The Melanie Special. Then my husband had his mistress going to my stylist, asking for my exact haircut and colour. The violation felt profound, as if Andrew was helping Jessica steal not just my husband, but my very identity. The final breaking point came 2 weeks later. Andrew had claimed to be attending a legal conference in Chicago, but I knew from my surveillance that he was actually in Boston. On an impulse, I drove by the exclusive restaurant where he and Jessica often dined. Through the window, I saw them at a corner table with another couple. Andrew's arm was around Jessica's chair, his expression animated as he spoke. Then I recognized the other couple, Thomas Peterson and his wife, Susan Andrews' mentor, and his wife People, who had attended our wedding, who had dined in our home countless times. Andrew raised his glass in a toast, and I could read his lips clearly, to new partnerships, both professional and personal. Susan hugged Jessica warmly, while Thomas shook Andrew's hand. They knew. They were celebrating. Andrew's affair wasn't just being tolerated by his colleagues. It was being embraced, legitimized. The betrayal was complete. Andrew hadn't just created a new version of me. He was erasing me entirely from his life, replacing me with an upgraded model while systematically destroying my reputation and self-worth. That night, I cried until there were no tears left. Then, in the stillness of early morning, something shifted inside me. The grief and shock gave way to clarity and cold, focused anger. I would not be erased. I would not be replaced. I would not go quietly. It was time for my secret appointment. My hands trembled as I dialed the number I had found online. Catherine Jackson was reputed to be the most ruthless divorce attorney in Boston, particularly in cases involving hidden assets and infidelity. Her office was discreet, located in a converted brownstone in Back Bay rather than a sleek downtown high-rise. Ms. Jackson can see you tomorrow at 9, her assistant told me after hearing only the basics of my situation. Bring any financial documents you can access and a retainer of $5,000. The retainer would nearly empty my personal savings, but I knew it would be worth it. That night, I carefully copied key financial statements, photographs of Andrew's corporate credit card statements, and screenshots of text messages I had found. I worked silently in our home office while Andrew slept upstairs, oblivious to my preparations. Catherine Jackson was not what I expected. I had imagined someone severe and intimidating, but the woman who greeted me was soft-spoken, with kind eyes. That impression lasted until she began reviewing my documents. Your husband is attempting a classic gaslight and devalue strategy, she said, her voice hardening as she examined the evidence. Creating a narrative of your instability while systematically transferring assets. And this business with his mistress adopting your appearance, that's a new one. Can he really leave me with nothing? I asked, voicing my greatest fear. Not if I have anything to say about it, Catherine replied. Your prenuptial agreement has a fidelity clause that he has clearly violated. More concerning is his apparent misuse of company funds to finance his affair. That's not just unethical, it's potentially criminal. She outlined a strategy that made my head spin. We needed more evidence, more documentation of Andrew's activities with Jessica and his financial manipulations. Most importantly, we needed to counter the narrative he was creating about my mental state. From this moment forward, you are the model of stability, Catherine instructed. Document everything, keep a daily journal, maintain your professional commitments impeccably, preserve your physical and mental health, and whatever you do, don't let him know you're onto him. My next appointment was with someone Catherine recommended, Michael Reeves, a private investigator who specialized in infidelity and financial fraud cases. His office was above a hardware store in Dorchester, unmarked except for a small plaque reading, Reeves Consulting. Attorneys like Catherine send me their most sensitive cases, Michael explained as I settled into a worn leather chair across from his cluttered desk. What you're describing, the asset hiding, the gaslighting, the identity theft aspects with the mistress, this is serious stuff. For the next 2 weeks, Michael and his team documented Andrew's movements, photographed his meetings with Jessica, and most importantly, gathered evidence of financial impropriety. They discovered Andrew had been using the company credit card for personal expenses related to Jessica, not just dinners and gifts, but payments for her apartment cosmetic procedures, even a lease on a luxury car. He's been writing these off as business development expenses, Michael explained, showing me copies of expense reports. But we've matched the dates and times with photographs of them together in clearly romantic situations. There's no business justification. More disturbingly, Michael uncovered evidence that Andrew had been transferring partnership shares into a shell company, presumably to hide them from divorce proceedings. He had also been withdrawing large sums from our joint investment accounts, laundering the money through a series of transactions designed to make it untraceable. He's not just planning to divorce you, Michael said grimly. He's planning to destroy you financially and professionally. The good news is he's getting sloppy. Arrogant people make mistakes. While this investigation proceeded, I focused on reclaiming my sense of self. The first step was my appearance. I went to a new salon and asked them to dye my brown bob a rich auburn and cut it into a pixie style that framed my face in a way that felt authentically me, not Andrew's version of me. The stylist, a woman named Zoe with multicolored hair and kind eyes, seemed to sense my need for transformation. Whoever made you think you needed to look any particular way was wrong, she said as she worked. This cut brings out your cheekbones and your eyes. It's strong, it's you. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely at my reflection. I looked different. I looked like myself. I threw myself into my work, reconnecting with clients I'd been neglecting during my emotional turmoil. I reached out to old friends, rebuilding connections Andrew had subtly encouraged me to let fade. I joined a support group for women in difficult marriages, finding strength in their stories and solidarity. Marina, my business partner, noticed the change immediately. "Something is different about you," she said. "You're more focused, more present, and I love the hair." "I'm finding myself again," I told her simply. I began documenting everything in a detailed journal. Andrew's comments, his absences, his gaslighting attempts. I recorded conversations when legally permissible. I maintained meticulous records of our finances and his manipulations. All the while, I pretended nothing had changed. I prepared meals, maintained our home, and responded to Andrew's increasingly transparent manipulations with calm detachment. If he noticed the changes in me, he attributed them to the instability he was so eager to establish. "Your new hair is interesting," he commented when I first revealed the change. "It's very dramatic. Are you feeling okay? This seems impulsive." "I felt like a change," I replied with a shrug. "Do you like it?" "It's just not very you," he said, studying me with narrowed eyes. I smiled, knowing it was exactly me, just not the me he had created. The final piece of my preparation came through an unexpected ally. Jessica Winters herself reached out to me through a burner email account. "I know who you are, and I know you must hate me," her message read. "But I think we should talk. Things aren't what they seem, and I have information you need." Against Catherine's advice, I agreed to meet Jessica at a coffee shop in Cambridge, far from Andrew's usual haunts. I arrived early, heart pounding, unsure what to expect. When Jessica walked in, the resemblance between us was still striking, but less so since my makeover. Up close, I could see the artifice more clearly, the careful makeup, the studied mannerisms. She was playing a role, wearing a costume. Me. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I don't have much time." "Why did you contact me?" I asked, struggling to keep the anger from my voice. "Because I made a terrible mistake," she replied, her composure cracking slightly. "And because I think Andrew is dangerous, not physically, but in every other way." Over the next hour, Jessica revealed a story that both confirmed my worst suspicions and added new dimensions to Andrew's betrayal. She had indeed been drawn into an affair with Andrew, but under false pretenses. He had told her I was mentally unstable, abusive, that our marriage was a sham, maintained for appearances. "He said you threatened suicide if he left," she explained, shame evident in her expression. "He painted himself as the tragic hero, staying in a broken marriage out of duty." More disturbing were the ways Andrew had systematically moulded her into my image. It started with small suggestions, that I might look nice with darker hair, that a certain style of dress would suit me, Jessica explained. "He bought me clothes identical to yours, took me to your stylist, even showed me pictures of you so I could copy your makeup. I thought it was, I don't know, a way of transitioning, of helping him adjust to a new relationship while honouring what he loved about you." She slid a USB drive across the table. "There's evidence here. Recordings of Andrew discussing plans to discredit you professionally, transfer records of company funds he misappropriated, even a timeline for the divorce where he plans to leave you destitute. He has no idea I kept these records. I started documenting everything when I realised what kind of man he really is." "Why are you helping me now?" I asked, still suspicious. "Because last week I overheard him on the phone with someone talking about the next Jessica," she said quietly. "Apparently, I'm becoming too independent, asking too many questions. He already has someone else in mind, his new assistant. I realised I'm just another version to him, another doll he can dress up and control. And when I stop being useful or obedient, hell, discard me too." As Jessica left, she turned back with one last comment. "He doesn't see us as people, Melanie. We're props in his life, interchangeable parts. Don't let him win." With Jessica's evidence added to what Michael had gathered, Catherine declared we were ready for the next phase. Andrew had no idea what was coming. The confrontation I had carefully orchestrated began with Andrew finally addressing what I had known for months. It was a Sunday morning and we were having coffee on our terrace, the early spring air still crisp with lingering winter. "We need to talk, Melanie," Andrew said, setting down his cup with deliberate care. "I think we both know things haven't been right between us for some time." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Yes, I think we do need to talk. I'm filing for divorce," he continued, studying my face for a reaction. "I've drawn up a settlement offer that I think is fair given the circumstances." "What circumstances would those be?" I asked mildly. His expression shifted slightly, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. "Your emotional state hasn't been stable, Melanie. Your business has been suffering. You changed your appearance drastically without discussion. These aren't the actions of someone in a healthy mindset." I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. "I care about you," he continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that once might have made me doubt myself. "I want to make sure you're taken care of. The settlement includes a monthly stipend that should cover your basic needs while you get back on your feet." "How generous," I replied. "And what about the house, my business, our investments?" Andrew cleared his throat. "The house will need to be sold with proceeds going toward outstanding debts. Your business, well, given its recent performance, there's little value there. As for investments, most were made with my income, so naturally." "Naturally," I echoed. "And where will you live, Andrew? With Jessica?" The colour drained from his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," I said calmly. "Jessica Winters, junior associate at your firm, the woman you've spent the last 2 years moulding into a replica of me." I leaned forward. "Does she know she's disposable, that you're already grooming her replacement?" "You're being hysterical," Andrew said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is exactly the kind of unstable behaviour I'm talking about." "Interesting word choice," I noted. Hysterical. From the Greek hysterikos, meaning of the womb. Historically used to diagnose women who didn't behave the way men wanted them to. I stood up. "I'm not hysterical, Andrew. I'm furious. And extremely well prepared." I suggested we meet with our respective attorneys the following day to discuss the divorce. Andrew readily agreed, clearly believing his careful groundwork had set the stage for his victory. He had no idea I had already engaged Catherine Jackson, assuming I would be represented by our family attorney, a golf buddy of his, who would likely roll over at the first sign of pressure. The meeting took place in a conference room at Catherine's office, rather than Andrew's firm, as he had expected. His face when he saw Catherine waiting for me was the first satisfying moment in months. "Catherine Jackson," he said, recognition and alarm flashing across his face. "I wasn't aware you were representing Melanie." "Full of surprises, aren't we?" Catherine replied with a predatory smile. "Shall we begin?" Andrew's attorney, Richard Colton, started by presenting their proposed settlement agreement, a document designed to leave me with virtually nothing while protecting Andrew's partnership, shares, our home, and most of our joint assets. As Richard spoke, Catherine took meticulous notes, occasionally exchanging glances with me. When Richard finished his presentation, Catherine leaned forward. "That was a fascinating proposal, Mr. Colton. Now, before we counter, I believe my client has something she would like to say to her husband." All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, centering myself for what was to come. "Andrew, for the past 2 years, you've been systematically gaslighting me, isolating me from friends and family, creating a false narrative about my mental stability, and preparing to leave me destitute." I began, my voice steady. "Simultaneously, you've been having an affair with Jessica Winters, using company funds to finance her transformation into a younger, more compliant version of me." Andrew started to interrupt, but Catherine silenced him with a raised hand. "We have documented evidence of your misappropriation of company funds," I continued as Catherine began distributing folders to everyone at the table. Credit card statements showing charges for Jessica's apartment cosmetic procedures, jewelry and travel all filed as business expenses. We have photographs of you and Jessica together on dates that correspond to these expenses. We have recordings of you discussing your plans to divorce me while hiding assets. Andrew's face had gone from confident to ashen as I spoke. His attorney frantically flipped through the documents, his expression growing increasingly concerned. Additionally, I continued, we have evidence of your attempts to transfer partnership shares to a shell company in anticipation of divorce proceedings, a clear violation of Massachusetts divorce laws regarding the concealment of marital assets. These are serious allegations, Richard Colton said, his voice strained. We would need time to review these materials. Of course, Catherine replied smoothly, but you should also know that we have already provided copies of the financial documentation to the managing partners at Morgan, Bailey and Peterson, as the misuse of company funds constitutes both an ethical violation and potentially criminal activity. At that moment, the conference room door opened, and Jessica Winters walked in, elegant, in a tailored suit that bore no resemblance to anything in my wardrobe. Jessica, Andrew gasped. What are you doing here, Ms.? Winters has provided a sworn affidavit regarding your relationship and your statements about plans to defraud Mrs. James in divorce proceedings, Catherine explained. She's also prepared to testify about your misuse of company funds. You set me up, Andrew said to Jessica, his face contorted with rage and betrayal. No, Andrew, she replied calmly. You set yourself up. I just finally recognized what you were doing, to both of us. The meeting that followed was one of the most satisfying experiences of my life. Andrew's carefully constructed plans crumbled before my eyes. His attorney, realizing the extent of Andrew's misconduct, began damage control, suggesting we find a mutually agreeable solution without involving the firm's management further. Too late. By that afternoon, Andrew had been called to an emergency meeting with the partners. By evening, he had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into financial impropriety. By the end of the week, his partnership was terminated. The divorce proceedings that followed were remarkably straightforward. Faced with overwhelming evidence of his misconduct, Andrew had no choice but to agree to a settlement that was more than fair to me. I kept our home, my business, and half of all legitimate marital assets. The prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause further entitled me to a significant portion of Andrew's partnership buyout. But the most satisfying victory wasn't financial. It was watching Andrew realize that his carefully constructed facade had crumbled completely. The man who had tried to erase me to replace me with a more compliant version had instead erased himself from the life and career he had built. As we signed the final divorce papers, Andrew finally spoke directly to me, his voice hollow. I don't understand how this happened. How did you know? How did you put all this together? I looked at him, this man I had once loved, now a stranger. You were so busy creating your perfect version of me that you never bothered to see who I really was. That's always been your weakness, Andrew. You never saw me at all. 1 year after my divorce was finalized, I stood in the newly expanded offices of Melanie James Designs, surveying what I had built. The studio now occupied an entire floor of a renovated textile mill in South Boston with a team of 8 designers working under my direction. Our client list had grown to include luxury hotels, upscale restaurants, and exclusive residential properties throughout New England. The irony wasn't lost on me that Andrew's betrayal had ultimately led to my professional success. The settlement had provided capital for expansion, and the process of reclaiming my identity had given me confidence I had never possessed when trying to be Andrew's version of the perfect wife. I had changed more than just my hair in the past year. My entire style had evolved, becoming more authentic to my true tastes rather than the neutral, safe aesthetic Andrew had subtly pushed me toward. I dressed in bold colours, wore statement jewellery, and spoke my mind without fear of disapproval. My personal transformation was reflected in my design work, which had become more innovative and distinctive. Clients sought me out specifically for the unique perspective I brought to projects, and my business had never been more successful. I was arranging flowers in the reception area when Marina appeared at my elbow. "There's someone here to see you," she said quietly. "Jessica Winters." My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen Jessica since the divorce proceedings, though I had heard through mutual connections that she had left Andrew's firm shortly after his dismissal. Jessica waited in our small conference room, and I was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the carbon copy of me that Andrew had created. Her hair was back to its natural blonde cut in a style that suited her face. She wore a bright blue dress that the old Jessica would never have chosen. "Thank you for seeing me," she said as I entered. "I wasn't sure you would." "What can I do for you?" I asked, maintaining a professional distance. "Nothing, actually," she replied. "I came to thank you. What happened last year? It forced me to face some uncomfortable truths about myself, about how easily I let someone else define me." We talked for nearly an hour. Jessica had left Boston, briefly spending time with family in Colorado to reset, as she put it. She had returned with a new perspective and a job offer from a competing law firm where she was building a promising career on her own merits. "I didn't realize how much of myself I had given away," she confessed, "not just with Andrew, but in other relationships too. I've always been a chameleon, becoming whatever version of myself I thought others wanted." I understood that feeling all too well. "It's an easy trap to fall into," I acknowledged, "especially with someone like Andrew, who makes the cage seem like protection." As our conversation wound down, Jessica hesitated before asking, "Have you heard anything about Andrew?" I had, though. I tried not to pay attention to news about my ex-husband. After losing his position and reputation in Boston, he had moved to Chicago to restart his career. According to mutual acquaintances, he was struggling professionally, the scandal having followed him despite his efforts to reinvent himself. "He's doing what he always does," I told Jessica, "trying to create a new narrative where he's the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own downfall." After Jessica left, I found myself reflecting on the strange bond we shared. Two women who had been manipulated by the same man, both of us reduced to interchangeable parts in his carefully curated life. Yet, we had both emerged stronger, more authentically ourselves. The past year had been one of rebuilding and discovery. I had travelled alone for the first time, a month in Italy studying historical architecture and design. I had taken up painting, something Andrew had discouraged as impractical. I had learned to define success on my own terms rather than through someone else's approval. There had been dark days too, moments of doubt and loneliness. Therapy had helped me recognize the patterns that had made me vulnerable to Andrew's manipulation and develop healthier boundaries. I had to relearn how to trust my own perceptions after years of subtle gaslighting. Dating again had been both terrifying and exhilarating. I had dinner with a graphic designer, coffee with a professor, even a brief fling with a younger sculptor that taught me I was still desirable, still capable of passion. None had developed into something serious until I met Daniel, an architect I collaborated with on a restaurant project. Daniel was different from Andrew in every meaningful way. Where Andrew had been controlling, Daniel was supportive. Where Andrew had tried to mold me, Daniel celebrated my uniqueness. Most importantly, Daniel saw me, really saw me, in a way Andrew never had. Our relationship was still new, just 4 months old, but it felt honest in a way my marriage never had. We disagreed, sometimes had different tastes and perspectives, but those differences were respected rather than smoothed away. As I locked up the studio that evening, I caught my reflection in the window. Auburn hair now grown into a stylish bob, confident posture. eyes clear and focused. I barely resembled the woman in my wedding photos, that carefully curated version of myself, designed to please someone else. The most valuable lesson from the collapse of my marriage wasn't about Andrew's betrayal or even the importance of financial independence, though both were significant. It was the recognition that I had participated in my own erasure by gradually surrendering my authentic self in exchange for approval and security. The woman who walked out of Katherine Jackson's office that day 1 year ago wasn't just legally empowered, she was spiritually liberated, free to define herself, to make mistakes, to evolve without permission or apology. Sometimes we have to lose parts of ourselves to discover the stronger person waiting beneath the surface, not a copy of someone else's ideal, but the most authentic version of who we truly are. If you've ever felt yourself disappearing in a relationship, becoming a reflection of someone else's expectations rather than your own truth, I hope my story gives you courage. Have you ever had to rediscover yourself after losing your way? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your identity. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the most beautiful version of you is the authentic one.